at our club and something we always look forward to each year. And so, Jeffrey, if you have a screen you want to share, you can feel free to share your screen. Otherwise, we will turn it over to you. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Technology is not my forte, but I believe I am sharing my screen. Can somebody confirm that I am here?
Don't see your screen yet.
Okay, good. All right, good. Well, I'm going to start out with just a personal note. First of all, greetings from Fort Lewis, Washington, which is where I am today and will be for the next week or so. And I would like to start out on a personal note because since the last time we spoke, I have yet another grandchild myself up in Fairbanks. And so I now have two, one of whom just turned 2, and the other one that was born May 28th. So both little boys and driving their mother and father crazy, as they should. But Grandma and Grandpa couldn't be happier because we can go have fun and then go home. It's wonderful. So I am enjoying grandpahood, I guess you call it. Also, on a personal note, as you know, Unishka is located in that's the company that I started. It's a social purpose corporation or social purpose organization. We're located in the Trinity Church in Juneau. And COVID was very difficult for us because of the difficulties with international travel and also the inability to get our consultants to be able to either travel or report in country. So it was quite challenging for us. However, yesterday we received news from the U.S. State Department that a consortium in which we're affiliated, led by AECOM, has just won a major contract to the tune of about $500 million over the next 5 years. And so we are one of 10 companies in that winning consortium. And so really happy about that. It's a good way to emerge from COVID, assuming we are emerging from COVID. But like many of you, I assume I've got my 3 vaccines, and I'm anticipating that there will be more as we move from the Delta variant to the Mu variant to whatever comes next on the horizon. But we will continue to fight it off as long as we need to so that we can continue to move forward. So those are my personal notes. And so really good news on both sides from a personal perspective. What I would like to talk about today, though, is Afghanistan. As you can imagine, we've spent a lot of time and invested a lot of effort in Afghanistan over the last 10 to 15 years that we have been working there. So I will start out with Afghanistan, and then I will move briefly to Iraq, where we have an upcoming election in October 10th. And so as you are well aware, we've had more than a few problems in the U.S. Withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of personal input on this. I tend to do less of that, or try to do less of that. But this time I'm going to do more of that simply because I see things coming up in the future, and I kind of want to explain what we'll be seeing, especially in Alaska, where so far we have agreed to take 100 Afghan refugees, but I am guessing that number will probably double or triple before it's all said and done. But let's go back just a bit. As you know, August 31st, the U.S. completed its withdrawal from Afghanistan. The withdrawal itself in getting U.S. forces out was generally successful. Obviously, you had a terrible tragedy of the loss of 17 U.S. service personnel at HKIA, the airport in Kabul. However, that was less precipitated by US withdrawal than it was protecting Afghans and our allies' withdrawal. The great failure that we have had in Afghanistan was the lack of planning leading up to our withdrawal. From a military perspective, it was a great success. That is, the US was able to withdraw all of its forces without casualties, leaving those 17 aside because they were not affiliated with the US withdrawal, but they were affiliated with withdrawing our allies. That is the folks on the ground that assisted us. So from a military perspective, it was successful. From a humanitarian perspective, it was an unmitigated disaster. And why was that? And what does it mean for the future? And where are we today? And that's kind of what I wanted to cover today, if you'll bear with me. So, as you know, we've talked multiple times over the course of the last 5 years or so on corruption in Afghanistan. From my perspective, which focuses pretty significantly on both corruption and terrorist finance, it was not but the primary reason for the failure of the Afghan government. This goes back, I believe, to the Bush administration, when we selected individuals to lead the Afghan government, primarily Karzai. And then we compounded that almost immediately by a rush to turn over jurisdiction to the Afghans before they were able to lead it. Then what we did is we dumped vast amounts of money onto a government that was unable to absorb that money. And let me give you an example of the problem of too much money. UNISCA, for example, we already know that we are unable to absorb the amount of money that that'll be flowing through us as a result of our new contract. So the first thing we have to do, and we've already done, is contact a larger organization to be able to help us administer and manage that money, so that you have the processes in place to ensure that that money is protected. But we live, in a society where we have that easily at our disposal, and we can reach out and grab that. In Afghanistan, what happened early on is we dropped vast amounts of money, usually in currency, because the banking system, known as the SWIFT system, was not operational in Afghanistan. So we dropped billions of dollars into ministries that were the leaders of which were not necessarily, did not necessarily have the best interest of the Afghan population in mind, but were in fact warlords that we wanted to ingratiate into our way of thinking. In fact, we couldn't have had a better playbook from the Russians. Is we made the exact same mistakes that the Russians made, and so we created leaders rather than selecting leaders that were already there, and leaders with integrity. I'll give you an example. Abdul Haq, who was probably 14 days or so away from overthrowing the Taliban in 2001, was not a favorite of the U.S. government. In fact, the station chief in Islamabad started kind of a campaign to refer to him as Hollywood Hawk, to kind of undermine his credibility in Washington, D.C., and kind of play him as an individual who was more interested in being in front of the cameras than he was protecting his people. Nothing could have been further from the truth. However, he made a mistake of underestimating the needs of the US government. What do I mean by that? The World Trade Center was taken down with spectacular video coverage that, obviously made news around the world for years and years and years to come. So from a terrorist perspective, and specifically Osama bin Laden, it was a great success. From the perspective of the US government, therefore, we needed to have a shock and awe campaign that would show an equivalent spectacular video coverage of us seeking retribution or revenge. Now, this is coming out of the White House. So as a result, we pushed away from Abdul Haq, and we would not move forward with his plan for the overthrow of the Taliban. And instead, we wanted to do it on our own. Unfortunately, our resources in that area had developed during the time of the Russians and the Russian occupation, and so we were being led by warlords. These were not government administrators. They were not people that had the best interests of their people necessarily at heart. They were very sectarian and very much interested in controlling their little fiefdoms. There were 7 of them altogether, and these we had funded them through the through the Pakistan intelligence service called the ISI. So this was the beginning of our problem. And what we did when we were successful very quickly at overrunning the Taliban is we rewarded the warlords with plum positions in the different ministries. So if you take, for example, the Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Defense, where we were literally spending billions of dollars a day with individuals that did even lacked high school diplomas and did not know how to administer. And so what happened was they did not know how to administer, or the organization itself was unable to absorb this level of money. So what they did is they did how they had always operated. The first thing they do is they take care of their family, then they take care of their tribe, then they take care of the region in which they live, and that is the extent of their gratuity. Beyond that, it's the other warlords have to get what is they feel is due for them, their families, and their tribes. And this created what is called a consociational government, where we had 7 different tribes that had different varying degrees of power across ministries in Afghanistan. Obviously, from a security sector side and an intelligence sector side, the Panjshir was probably the leading province, and that was led by Masood. And then after he died, that we had various leaders today. Today it's led by his son. However, we went through various leaders that almost always the Ministry of Interior, which is the National Police, and the Ministry of Defense, and the NDS, which is their equivalent of our CIA, was led by Panjshiris. Other ministries were led by other members of this consociational government, different tribes. The problem is that no one was looking out for Afghanistan. The Panjshiris were looking out for the Panjshiris. Gulbuddin Hikmatyar was looking out for the Pashtuns. You had Ismail Khan was looking out for the Haratis. Atta Mohammed was looking out for the folks from Balk, etc. So basically what you had is you had these little fiefdoms and no one was looking out for Afghanistan. Karzai represented, of course, the Pashtun side of this. And while he gave the pretense of representing Afghanistan, his true allegiance and alliance was with Gobadin Hikmatar and those from the south, specifically Kandahar, Helmand, etc., who are strongly affiliated with the Taliban. After Karzai, we moved to Ghani, and we saw much the same thing, although dressed up a little bit differently and with a little bit more international acumen. But for the most part, it was about funding their fiefdoms within the consociational government of Afghanistan. So here we move on, the same thing year after year after year, that the United States is trying to deal with a government that's representing Afghanistan, and at no time were there leaders that represented Afghanistan. Additionally, again, this is my personal opinion, we appointed Zalmay Khalilzad as our ambassador. Giving you my personal opinion, not the opinion of UNISCA or the opinion of the US government, I found Zalmay Khalilzad to be just as corrupt as the Afghan officials that with whom he was working. Zalmay Khalilzad was born in Afghanistan, although he became a US citizen and was eventually rose to the level of ambassador, and still has the level of ambassador to the peace process. However, he is very strongly Pashtun, and he represents that faction. Additionally, he is just as ensconced in the corruption as the 7 different warlords. It just takes a quick Google search to see that, for example, in Austria, the Austrian government began an investigation to his money laundering through the Austrian banks, and he has several $100 million in investments around the world. Yet his sole source of income has been as a U.S. official diplomat and as the owner of a company called Griffin, which has a lot of dark side contracts with U.S. funding on what we call the black budget, right? So this was the situation that we had to deal with year after year after year. And so I think that there was no other alternative except our pulling out, because we had failed so badly at the beginning that all we were doing was dumping money into this vast money pit and creating millionaires and billionaires. At UNISCA's last count, we had created 17 billionaires in Afghanistan. Billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires. The number of millionaires that we created is beyond count, well into the hundreds. And so I think we made the right choice at getting out. However, we really messed up in our lack of planning. And what we failed to take into consideration was that the Taliban that existed before is still the same Taliban that exists today, the exact same people. However, they have now hired PR firms. They have a lot more money because they benefited from all the money that was coming into the country. Much of that supported the Taliban. And so they have begun to hire PR firms around the world to put a nice bow tie on their new administration. However, they are doing the exact same things. They are repressing women. They are having summary executions in the streets. One of our people was driving with his family from Kabul to Mazar in order to be evacuated out of Mazar. Because he had U.S. contacts on his phone, he was taken out of his car and summarily executed right there on the spot. That goes on a daily basis now in Afghanistan. As you have probably seen in the news, and I'm happy to share the memoranda that have come out from the Taliban, women that are unmarried between the ages of 21 and 28 are now required to marry the Emirati of Afghanistan. So what does that mean? It means you're married to the government and you will be the bride of whomever they say. So you may shift around and be the bride to 3, 4, 5 different men over the course of time, or you may be the bride of one individual. That's up to the government to decide. So this is what the legacy that we have left Afghanistan. We currently have tens of thousands of individuals that are awaiting evacuation. Evacuation will not occur. Evacuation will not occur because, in my opinion, the current White House does not know how to negotiate with the Taliban, and the recommendations are led by Zalmay Khalilzad, who is deeply ensconced in the problem. And so being able to negotiate with the Taliban is not, you cannot negotiate with a terrorist organization. Again, my personal opinion, but from the English experience in the region forward, we have learned that you negotiate with governments, you do not negotiate with terrorists, and it is rarely successful. So we have evacuated probably close to 120,000, maybe a little bit more than that now, 150,000. But we just being the United States, have over 1 million requests for refugee status. Let me give you an example of some of the individuals we're looking at. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that we developed and put into his position. The former National Security Advisor, who we just recently got to Istanbul, and with any kind of luck, we will be getting to Canada. But one of the prosecutor, you've heard of the Haqqani Network, perhaps. This was probably the largest and most well-known affiliate of the Taliban, and the 4 Haqqani brothers now run different ministries, including the National Police, Ministry of Interior. They are Anas Haqqani, the prosecutor who prosecuted him in 2015 at the behest of the United States, has been left in Afghanistan. We currently have him in hiding. We are trying to get him out, but this leads to the larger problem. And what is the problem today? The problem that we're having in Afghanistan today is the US government has identified the people that they want to get out, but it is very difficult to process those people while they are still in Afghanistan. So you have to get them to a third country in order to be able to process them, specifically Qatar, perhaps Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even Pakistan. We've moved some people to Albania. We even have moved some people to Colombia. The problem is most countries do not want Afghan refugees. Why is that? Well, because the United States, until we process them, cannot guarantee that that individual will be allowed into the United States. And a legitimate government will not send an individual back into Afghanistan while it is being run by the Taliban which has not been recognized even by the Chinese at this point. The Chinese have wished them well, but they have not recognized them. So there is no government on the planet that recognizes the Taliban as the legitimate government. So you can't return the refugees if they don't make it into the United States. Consequently, the United States has set up a reject camp at Camp Bondsteel in Kosovo, but that Camp Bondsteel has limited capabilities. That is, you're only going to be able to house at well, in a humanitarian fashion, you'll only be able to house about 2,500 people at Camp Bondsteel. Although there is room for some expansion, it's going to be difficult. But what we recognize is until those people die, they will be housed at Camp Bondsteel in Kosovo. So the United States is going to be providing the life support for those individuals indefinitely. We have determined that they're either a security risk or they did not meet the requirements to come into the United States. That is, they did not work for the United States or United States contractor or NGO for a minimum of 1 year before 2018 or 2 years if their employment began after 2018. And so what happens is those individuals are going to be there for life or until the Taliban are overthrown. So we cannot take people out until they are processed because third countries will not take them unless we can guarantee that they're moving forward to the US. And there's limited capabilities in Kosovo. So what we have is we have hundreds of thousands of individuals that are currently in very desperate situations in Afghanistan. And that is the problem that we're facing today. And so folks like UNISCA, we are doing in-country processing as quickly as we can. And as under the current the difficulties of working within a Taliban regime, given that if they find any communications from US-based organizations, that the individuals involved will be summarily executed. So that is the problem that we are having. So in summary, I believe that the Biden administration was made a wise choice in getting us out of Afghanistan. But the planning, whether it was by the State Department or the military to leading up to the withdrawal, was an abomination. But I also would like to use that as an example or symbolic of Afghanistan from 2001 to present. Yesterday, you may have seen the testimony of General Miley, and essentially he blamed the State Department and Secretary Blinken. And Secretary Blinken, on the other hand, is saying, hey, we don't have the resources. We just ran the embassy. It belongs to General Miley. And both of them today still have a job. And this has been the problem that we've seen in Afghanistan from day one going forward. And that is, there is no accountability. One person messes up, the next person messes up, and there is no one called onto the carpet and no one called to account so that the next person says, hey, we need to have a shift in policy here. And this is, from my perspective, this is not limited to Afghanistan. I see the same thing again throughout the region, throughout the Middle East, Central Asia, and now into Latin America as we put more and more resources into the Northern Triangle. So let me leave it at that. And that is the current situation where we are in Afghanistan. What is the future for Afghanistan? I believe that the Taliban will continue to consolidate. I believe also that the Taliban will continue with their repressive regime. Unfortunately, the Northern Alliance, which is now known as the Northern NRF, the Northern Resistance Forces, has all but collapsed. Massoud and Vice President Saleh have forces that are in the mountains, but they are disorganized, and right now they are focused exclusively on just living through the winter. We are facing a massive humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan over the course of the next 6 months. As temperatures drop, you have to remember most of these cities like Kabul, for example, are a mile high, and they do not have the infrastructure that we have in the United States. So while you have some electricity in Kabul, most of the areas and most of the population do not have access to electricity, nor do they have access to heating. And so as the winter comes in, you're going to have more and more people that are faced with severe adverse conditions. I would put it, you're going to see thousands of people that die as a result of either starvation because the food is not coming in from overseas, and Panjshir Valley was overrun. That's the breadbasket of the country. So you will see, I believe, at minimum, thousands of people that die as a result of either the adverse weather or as a result of what we call natural disasters, but they're avoidable natural disasters. For example, people tend to go to the mountains and live in the caves during the winter because they can keep them warm. However, they're very susceptible to landslides and snowslides, avalanches. So I believe you'll see a lot of people die over the course of the winter. However, I don't believe that the Taliban will remain in power long. I believe that you're going to see a pretty significant shift. But right now, the world is not headed toward a good place. We have a significant amount of unrest in the Balkans. The Balkans right now are a powder keg, especially in the Republic of Srpska, which is part of the tri-governments of Bosnia. You have severe unrest and corruption right now with the government in Slovenia, which is really sad because Slovenia was a really upstanding and strong partner for the United States. And during the last administration, we sponsored a fairly corrupt government there. And so you're seeing a powder keg there. And then, of course, China, with its Belt and Road system, buying government debt. Like, for example, China has purchased the entire national debt of Papua New Guinea and basically control that government because the Papua New Guinea has fallen into a debt trap. And now we're seeing the same thing in Africa. So you also are seeing the emergence and the strength of Al-Qaeda. It has emerged ironically, in the eastern part of Afghanistan, and they are growing and expanding in Northern Africa, in East Africa, and you have North Korea, which is also making great strides into Eastern Africa. So the U.S. has not done a good job at reining this in over the course of the last 8 or so years. And that needs to be addressed first thing. I have great confidence in the U.S. government at this point. The U.S. government has leaders that understand this, but these are not easy. They're not easy answers here. It's not like you can just say, oh, we've identified the problem, let's go solve it. We've identified the problem, but now it's very complex, which leads us over to Iraq. And what we have in Iraq is we have an election coming up. Again, we had an invasion in Iraq, U.S.-led invasion in Iraq in 2003. Again, we brought in individuals that we, as history has pointed out, were significantly corrupt and did not have the best interests of the people, either the U.S. or the Iraqis. For example, Ahmed Chalabad, who is now Chalabi, who is now deceased, or take, for example, Prime Minister al-Maliki and his son, who are deeply ensconced in corruption. To give you an example, again, a quick Google search will see that his son was found with $1 billion in cash, in US currency, in a villa in Beirut. And he apologized to the Lebanese government and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to declare this money when we brought it in. You can go ahead and keep it and have a nice day." That is how much money he has, that he can walk away from $1 billion in currency. And that's your money, by the way, just so you're aware. That's US taxpayer money. Nonetheless, in the last year, the Iraqi people were successful in getting a prime minister that is much stronger. His name is Kadhimi, and he is much more savvy and less corrupt than Maliki was, and he is truly making an attempt to diminish corruption within the government and within the country. The problem is his, like Afghanistan, his power is not monolithic. So as again, you have the same type of consociational government, but as he cracks down, for example, on corruption and grand corruption, he goes after, let's say, for example, a Kurdish corrupt politician, then the Kurds withdraw their power. Then he perhaps goes after a Shia politician and the Shia withdraw their power. And the same thing with the Sunni. And fairly soon you have a prime minister that lacks the power to govern effectively. And so he has to be very judicious about how he moves forward. And I believe right now he is making many of the right steps. The problem that we're facing in the upcoming election, however, is foreign state actors, I believe, are looking to undermine this election, and it will be used as the basis for a coup. I think that the odds are more likely than not that in the next 60 to 90 days, we will see a coup in Iraq, at least at this point. And everything that the United States has invested in will be gone, and we will be right back to where we were with Saddam Hussein, except for obviously Saddam is gone, and you will have Lieutenant General El-Saidi, who will be leading the country. So it's not bright. Our future right now, from an international perspective, is not bright. However, it's not all bad either. The United States has gotten back into alliances, and while it sounds good in sound bites to say we're going to do everything and go it alone, unfortunately, it doesn't work that easy. And it's not just about military might or being able to project power. It's mostly about economic might. And currently, the U.S. is still and remains the economic power in the world today. However, chomping at our heels and with a great deal of resources behind them are the Chinese. And it is the Chinese are exploiting natural resources around the world. And that is why, for example, they ingratiated themselves to the Taliban so they could get to the lithium and cobalt mines that are in Ghazni province, Herat province, and Helmand province in Afghanistan. You see the same thing in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You see the same thing in Bougainville, the newest country on the planet. That's also one of the smallest countries on the planet, but they also have the largest open copper mine in the world. And all of these are being acquired by the Chinese because the Chinese do not play by the same rules. And so the US going it alone is not the right answer. And I think that we have begun to see that. And so we have recently begun to build alliances, most recently with Australia and the UK, to begin to limit the expansion of China. However, I will tell you that we are starting this way late in the game, and it appears at this juncture that just by sheer numbers that the Chinese will overtake the US as an economic power fairly soon. And fairly shortly after that, they will overtake the US as a military power. And let me give you an example. I believe today, China has 2 major aircraft carriers. They have 5 in production. They have another 12 on the drawing board. So it will not be long before the Chinese Navy is able to project as strongly as the US Navy projects. And as an example, I don't know whether you saw about 2 weeks ago, it did not get a lot of play in the news, but the Chinese were projecting power in Alaska in the Aleutian chain. Much of the Star Wars initiative that was created by the Reagan administration is administered through the naval facilities in the Aleutian chain. And the Chinese are aware of that. And the Chinese fleet still operating in international waters, but within the US economic zone, went all up and down the Aleutian chain to be able to project power, to be able to show that they can reach into those areas quite easily. And so we are facing a very difficult future. I don't know how much time I have here. I know my time is somewhat limited, but I would like to hit on my. Looks like my time is up, but I would like to hit on one last thing, which is corruption, which is my area that I am working diligently on fighting. And again, on a personal note, I will be teaching again this year at the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna, which is operated by UNODC, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, as well as the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, where we focus on training law enforcement in combating corruption. And 2 years ago, the United States finally designated corruption as a national security priority, which means that it is corruption that is undermining our national security. And it is what allows, for example, the Chinese to be able to get into China to get into Africa and to get into Central Asia and exploit those resources, because they will operate in corrupt environments with corrupt actors, and the US will not. And the answer is not for the US to change its policy. The answer is to put pressure on the Chinese, economic pressure, to limit that, because without the US market, China is nothing. China's money comes from the US and Western Europe. That will change as its own economic base develops. But right now, their money is coming from the US. And so we have the ability to influence their spending and their exploitation of natural resources. And I believe the current administration is doing that. I believe that the last administration also was doing that. So I think the US generally has finally turned this corner and has become less fixated and infatuated with regional issues and has turned into, again, a global light for democracy. And I know that that sounds almost a little bit comical given the problems that we've had in our own country. But let me tell you, America on its worst day is better than any other country on the planet. So be thankful that you live here. And on that note, I'll turn it back over, and perhaps if you have anyone has any questions specifically about Afghanistan or the upcoming elections in Iraq. Also, a shameless plug, I do quite a bit of interviews. I do multiple interviews on a network called MBN. It is the Arabic equivalent of CNN. And those are all available on YouTube if you're interested in seeing additional information on this. So questions or any comments?
Thank you, Jeff. I know we're past 8 o'clock.
And so if everybody has to go to work, feel free to leave now. The meeting is adjourned, but if people want to stay around, Jeff, if you're going to be around for a few extra minutes to answer some questions, that would be great. And so thank you all for being here. I can appreciate the last note of our country being in such a better place compared to some of these other places, even on our worst day. And so on that happy note, this meeting is adjourned, and then if there are questions, we can continue to stay online to answer some questions. Thank you all.
Thank you, and my apologies for going over.
Are there any questions?
If you would, well, you could ask it. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm trying to formulate how I want to ask a question. I'm wondering what your thoughts on the plight of Afghan women. I mean, I know what you said, but when the U.S. was involved, a lot of women were getting an education of some sort. And do you think that education is going to help them improve their country, or are they just going to be repressed to the point of servitude? Thanks.
Great question. You can probably tell that I've got some roiling emotions in myself, having invested a great deal of my career, both my military career and my my subsequent career in these regions. What we saw under the previous administrations in both Iraq and Afghanistan is quite a bit of lip service that was given to gender equality. However, while there was a lot of lip service that was given, the US and Western Europe has many, many women that are in the government itself. And for them, it was just not lip service, as it were. So as a result, they pushed exceptionally hard to get women's empowerment programs and women's education programs in those countries. And I'd like to call out, for example, specifically Susan Bongard from Canada, the first secretary of the Canadian Embassy in Afghanistan, who remained in Afghanistan for almost 10 years, fighting for the rights of women. And she's not the only one. Another Junoite named Heather Barr, who is currently the head of gender equality over at Human Rights Watch in London, also has worked tirelessly for the rights of women. And what we saw was that while the government itself was giving lip service to the to women's rights and gender equality, there were substantive changes because those changes were tied to money. So, for example, in all of our programs, we were required to have gender equality. They didn't make it exact, but if you didn't have 50% women in your programs were going to be adversely affected from a monetary perspective. As a consequence, women became empowered. They became better educated, and they became economically empowered. The best way to empower anyone is to get them money, of course. And so the issue that, or what we have seen, is that the empowerment cascades across the society. And so women empower other women. And what this does, and I think many people fail to understand this, is this also takes 50% of your economic base and gives that economic base economic resources to join in the marketplace, which makes the country stronger. And as a result, the overall country was stronger as a result. What I believe is going, and so we have numerous women that were empowered over the last 20 years. And if you will look in the news yesterday and over the course of the last month, the only individuals that have been protesting and out on the streets face to face with the Taliban are the women. And so they are not going to withdraw from this. And I believe that I didn't get a chance to really delve into it, but I don't believe that the Taliban will remain in power for, between 2 and 5 years, because I believe that they will be overthrown. And I believe that women will take a major place in overthrowing the Taliban. I believe that the U.S. is very much focused on an external solution, but I believe the answer will be an internal solution in which women are deeply ensconced.
Jeffrey,
Yeah.
This is Rosemary. I have a comment and a question. I just been thinking here as you went through all of this. I believe it was Alexander the Great that advised against ground wars in Asia many, many, many years ago. And
the death of empires.
The death of empires, exactly. But I
Yeah.
have a couple of specific questions. Could you comment on the weapons and technology that was left behind by the US government? Could you also comment on the applicability of what they're calling the over-horizon technology? And yesterday, when the generals were doing their testimony, all three of them said that they had advised the executive branch of our government to leave 2,500 troops on the ground there. And would that have at least ended up with a little more stability?
So in order, we left a mass amount of material on the ground. Much of that will not have viability after about 6 months. U.S. equipment is very high technology, and very high technology means very high maintenance. And that means that in a short amount of time, that equipment will no longer be usable, because the maintenance is not there, and the Taliban lack the resources to maintain it. Who does have the resources to maintain it is the ISI, that is the Pakistani intelligence service. And however, it's unlikely that they will maintain it for the Taliban. They will maintain it, but they'll take it back to Pakistan. And there is nothing there that the Pakistanis don't already have. It will just augment their arsenal already. So leaving the equipment there was very poor, because all it takes is one incendiary grenade, and you can it takes just a minute to destroy, less than a minute, a few seconds to destroy a helicopter. So why we left the equipment there, again, poor planning. However, the fact that we left the equipment there from a military perspective will have very little military significance after 6, 9 months, maybe a year. For the equipment that has that has strategic importance, like say, for example, the helicopters, either the Black Hawk or the Cobras. The M16s, for example, they will last for quite some time, but the M16 uses a 5.56 round, whereas the AK-47 uses a 7.62, and the Taliban are predicated on a 7.62. So really, the M16s, they look fancy and they make for great pictures, but the Taliban really don't have any need for them, and so they'll end up selling them overseas, or giving them overseas. They won't give them. They'll sell them overseas to other organizations, probably in Africa. The next question that you had is, I remember the 2,500 troops, but that was last. What was
Over the horizon.
Over the horizon, sure. So we left, as far as I know, we did not leave any over the horizon equipment in the country that is sustainable or is viable. So for example, they were able to acquire a number of our drones. They will have drone technology, but that doesn't do the Taliban any good. The Pakistanis already had the drone technology. The Iranians would be, even if they get the drone technology, which they had from a few years ago when we had a drone that went down in Iran, it's unlikely that there's anything there that will be able to do them any good. Specifically, we're talking about drones that fire the Hellcat missile as an over-the-horizon armament. So I don't think that there's anything there that is going to be viable going forward because of the technology. While the equipment is there, the software that operates that equipment is either in Texas or California. And so we can shut, with a push of a button, we can completely wipe out the software in those drones. So while they will have the explosive that's in the Hellcat missile, they'll have the Hellcat missile, they will have the drone, they are unable to use it or launch it because there is no software even to make the system work. So again, you may have something that might have some terrorist viability. That is, they can show a picture on the nightly news, but from a military perspective, it has very little military significance.
But on over the horizon technology, I was kind of referring also to the our government's insistence that they'll be able to do the subversive kinds of things, I guess, that they are needing to do using over the horizon technology.
Yeah.
And the first example of that appeared to have been a big failure.
Yeah, generally the U.S. can operate from the U.S. We can generally operate anywhere in the world in information collection called SIGINT. When you're talking about being able to implement, we will not be able to implement without boots on the ground. It's that simple. We have made that mistake 100 times over, where we relied too heavily on SIGINT, signals intelligence. But we do have resources in the region specifically, and the Iranians, the Israelis are so strong in Iran that I'm saying it facetiously, but it's almost true, that they are almost stronger in Iran than the Iranian government is in terms of military power. So because they are very successful at it. The U.S. is less so successful at being able to administer over the horizon, but our worst day from a military perspective is better than the Taliban's or the Iranians or I won't say the Pakistanis, but clearly it's better than their best day. So yes, can we project over the horizon? And will we continue to have successes with those projection platforms? I believe we will. However, our problem is not being able to project military. Our problem is in policy. We have failed miserably in policy. Our military has been a great success. We militarily defeated Iraq in a very short period of time. We were militarily defeated the Taliban in a very short period of time. And then we made a tragic mistake at making the military the diplomats and our foreign ambassadors. It is not what the military does. It was unfair to the military. And so our problem is a policy problem, not a projection problem.
Interesting. Thank you. How about the 2,500? How about
So
the
25? I happen to agree with the military from, of course, I spent 23 years in the military, as you know, but I agree from a military perspective, if we had, and I'm not talking about Afghanistan, I'm talking about Kabul specifically. With 2,500 men, we could have kept Kabul until all of our folks were out and our planes, the folks that we were evacuating were out of the country. I think again, it gets into a policy problem. And this is what happens when you have, in my opinion, you have presidents who have not served in the military. And that would be virtually, every president back to Bush Sr. And I know you can make the argument that the National Guard was the military, but, I'm talking about, active duty and serving in situations where you understand the strategic importance of things. But the problem is the White House there would have been casualties. There is no question, because the Taliban were going to attack. We were going to have to defend the city. However, there's no question that we would have been successful, but we would have had casualties. Those casualties probably would have numbered in the hundreds. The White House was concerned about the political implications of that in the upcoming elections. And as a consequence of that, in my opinion, they made a real poor strategic decision because their policy was poor. They were more interested in the politics than they were interested in proper administration of government. That is my personal opinion. I believe that we should have kept the 2,500 in. We should have protected Kabul while we evacuated people. We would have had, several hundred losses of U.S. life in that. But that is why you join the military. I know when I joined the military, I was deployed 20-something times, 23 times. And I knew every time I went in that I was putting my life at risk. My family knew that. But you know what? That is why I joined the military. And that is why people join the military, is because they want to be that bulkhead to protect U.S. power and protect the U.S. interests. And so, yes, I believe that the 2,500 people would have sustained us through the withdrawal, and we would not have had the abomination that we have today, where our allies, the people that worked with us for more than a decade, are being hung upside down on flagpoles and executed and then left up there for days as they desecrate their bodies. That is just not acceptable to me. And again, I would like to repeat that in my opinion, as much as I support the Biden administration's decision on withdrawal, they do not know how to deal with the Taliban. You do not negotiate with the Taliban, or you do negotiate, but you negotiate with military weapons. That's what they understand. So, you drop a 500-pound bomb on the palace and you say, we want to take people out. That is what they understand. They do not understand when you show up and say, hey, this is a humanitarian crisis and we're taking out people that need humanitarian assistance. That to them is a weakness. And there is a book that is well worth reading. It's called the Pashtunwali. And it is how it's available on the internet. It's never been published in English, although it has recently been translated and is now available on the internet, but is basically the code for the Pashtun. Just like you have the samurai had their code and the US military has its code, the Pashtun Wali speaks about the Pashtun code. And I would bet you $100 that if you went to the Senate Intelligence Committee or to the White House and asked the folks there if they have ever heard of it, much less read it, that you'll find that the answer is no. And unless you understand your enemy, you are going to lose that fight, as we have proven.
And as Alexander the Great advised us many, many centuries ago.
I remember it's Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for that clarification, Jeffrey, on the 2,500. I think what I hear you saying is that you would have just thought that that meant for a short period of time, the 2,500, but really the whole Afghanistan was kind of a lost cause due to the mistakes of the past 20 years.
that's correct. Yeah. And primarily due to corruption. And I really I want to apologize for inserting a lot of my own personal opinions and comments into this. But as you can tell, I invested 20 years of my life in these regions. And so I do have an emotional investment. And in this forum, I can kind of vent a little bit. Whereas, when I'm speaking to the national press or I'm speaking in Washington, D.C. to the Senate Intelligence Committee, I don't have the same leeway. And so I can't vent as much. But
We appreciate that.
Very,
I'm just wondering about the humanitarian crisis. Seems like that's not being given enough attention at all. These people that are probably going to starve over this coming winter. Are there any organizations that you see as having a real chance to help in that arena? Is it the UN food program or anything else?
Well, I had a discussion yesterday with Mercy Corps that's located down in Portland, Oregon. I don't know whether you've heard of them or not. Mercy Corps is going to continue to operate in Afghanistan. Also yesterday, I talked with International Medical Corps out of Washington, D.C. They are going to continue to operate there. Obviously, the International Red Crescent will continue to operate there. Perhaps the most viable NGO that will be operating there will be the Aga Khan organization. The Aga Khan, who is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Aga Khan organization or the Aga Khan. The Aga Khan is the leader of the Ismaili religion, and the Ismaili religion has, you're putting me on the spot here. I'm going to swag it. This is a Google question, not a Jeff question, but I would guess somewhere between, or let's say roughly 20 to 30 million followers around the world. But most of them are in the northeast corner of Afghanistan, in Iran and Tajikistan, and they are led by the Aga Khan. And the Aga Khan is very westernized. He's educated in the UK. He's an extremely wealthy individual, obviously, but he is not into projecting military power. He is into taking care of his people. And as a consequence, that's what he focuses on. And so I've had the pleasure of working with the Aga Khan in that region. And I feel that at least in some respects, they will be able to assist. But I will tell you that I intentionally reduced the numbers that I feel personally are going to be exposed this winter. I said hundreds and into the thousands. Honestly, that number is going to probably be tens of thousands, and perhaps even hundreds of thousands, depending upon what happens in Panjshir. The sad part is you will never hear about it. And one of my drivers, and again, shut me up because I could go on. I've got an emotional flow going on here because have been very frustrated these last several months. But one of the things that really turned me on Karzai, President Karzai, was the same time that we were able to identify him as a billionaire in the world, now somewhere between 30 and 50 billion dollars, all of which was stolen from US taxpayers. 34 children froze to death at orphanages in the northern part of Afghanistan. If you do a quick Google search for orphans freezing to death in February 2012, you will see that at the exact same time that UNISCA was able to validate that he was a multi-billionaire, we were also saw in the news that children were freezing to death, orphans were freezing to death. And that is a social issue because he is an extreme, any person, whether it's Karzai or anyone else, any person that has the power to and would let an orphan freeze to death so that you can acquire more money has some real problems, in my opinion. And so, we don't see any difference with this administration, with the new Afghan administration than we did with the old one. So whether it's Karzai, whether it's Ghani, or whether it's the Taliban, we see the same social damage manifest in its leaders. And until we fix the society, we won't fix that individual damage.
I think you're right. The women are the ones that are going to have to do it.
No question in my mind. And that's why UNISCA has very strong gender component, and we are working with women's organizations. And ironically, there is a woman leader in Nepal who is actually organizing the women in Afghanistan to, some of them believe that the answer is military and they are going to the mountains. Others of them believe that the answer is getting all the women together and forcing the men to take action, like women have done, for generations.
Yeah.
And, all you have to do is read Simone de Beauvoir to see, and The Second Sex as an example, to understand the power of women and how they have been repressed. And if we can unleash that power, what that means globally.
Yeah.
So just my 2 cents worth.
Okay.
Well, on that note, it's 8:30. Jeffrey, we want to give you the chance to bow out if you're got other things to do.
I need more coffee.
Because I slept in. You guys gave me the opportunity to sleep in for 2 extra hours this morning, so I didn't have to wake up until 7 this morning. So I'm a really happy camper.
The beauty of time zones.
Yeah,
We're off.